these half-trained ordained priests that may get loose. And that's why I said he ordained somebody from one church just got loose, and I said, oh.
I can't thank you enough for setting me up for this.
And also the lady who prayed over your chairs and put seats instead of chairs. I'm so sorry about that in house visits.
Well, we just did the best we could with what we had. I think that you really point out part of the problem we're facing church-wide is resources decline. It becomes harder and harder to train clergy properly for the vast task that they're facing. And we have, over the last 20 years, moved more and more to what are known sort of in general as local training programs, where clergy are trained locally. And we do that some in this diocese, as many of you know, because we use Canberra School of Theology and their Anglican Studies program for training for some people, not all people, but for some. But still, in the Diocese of Atlanta, the top priority is for seminary-trained people. Now, that doesn't mean that the way we're doing seminary training can't change. It has to change, because the world has changed. And so the standard 3-year academic curriculum based on the 18th century model is probably going to have to change. But I'm very nervous about clergy who are unprepared fully to serve congregations. I'm looking for some charity here. Well, I remember one of the things my ordaining bishop told me, reminded me, he said, you always have to remember that a priest doesn't make a congregation what it is, but a congregation can never be more than what its priest is. I think that the proof of that's coming home out of many of these local training programs. The clergy who are not fully qualified to serve in congregations oftentimes are an inhibiting factor in the congregation's life and growth. Not that they intend to be that, but that's what happens. Congregational life is about all kinds of things. I mean, certainly it's about sacramental ministry, all of those kinds of things, but it's also about a lot more than that. It's about leadership, it's about developing leaders, about all sorts of things. And so I'm not sure that we're doing a lot of good by lowering the standards. And we did lower the standards. It was interesting when Title III, which is all the ordination canons, was first revised. It was interesting because there was no longer any measure of any areas for ordination in the priesthood. In other words, you didn't have to be examined. There were no criteria for ordination in the canon until some of us raised the roof about it at General Convention and said, we're going to ordain people with no standards whatsoever. So that was the proposal. So it was even worse than what we ended up with. I do think we have to have high standards. And unfortunately, the reality of having high standards educationally and in terms of individual formation is cost. We right now have 11 seminaries, most of which are struggling financially. 15 years ago, there was a plan to convince them to merge with one another for scale of the economy. They refused to do that. They are independent institutions. They do not belong to the church and under no control of the church. So we still have 11. They still won't join together and work cooperatively. And so, nature's going to take its course. I was having a conversation with somebody at a clergy conference. It was one of those over a beer conversations, just so you know, so you can just put whatever weight on it you want. But everybody at the table was pretty much convinced we're going to end up with 4 seminaries in the Episcopal Church. And that would be a much better solution. And that everyone in this ordination system in the Episcopal Church would go to one of those 4 places. And that we would stop doing outside training to the extent that that's humanly possible. We could never do that 100%. But that we would go back to And we have, now that we've changed the canons, I mean, this is one of the problems, we've changed the rules. We used to have two distinct categories of priests. There were Canon 8 priests who were ordained under the normal process of seminary training, and Canon 9 priests who were ordained under local training. And Canon 9 priests could only serve in the congregation for which they were ordained. They did not have the right to move around the church. But in 2003, we changed it. We just said a priest is a priest, which is theologically. And so I think that we all need to be concerned about that because it has an impact on the whole church. Although, you know, the cathedral is not likely to have somebody who's ordained locally or trained locally. But there are congregations in this diocese who might. And so I think we need to have some concern for the wider church about maintaining some responsible standards for the quality of the people going through the ordination process. And again, anybody who's been around ordained ministers for 5 minutes knows that a mismatch between priest and congregation can kill a congregation faster than anything else. Well, they're trained locally. A diocesan training program. They may have, particularly in the middle of the country, there are a number of dioceses which do not send anybody to seminary. They'll have a 2 or 3 year training program. You'll meet one weekend a month kind of thing. And they'll try to cover all the canonical areas. All of that wouldn't be bad if they took the general ordination exam at the end of it, but they usually don't. They usually have locally constructed exams too. And that's the one good thing about our general ordination exams. They're constructed to test across the church, not just for local training. So, why is that? Well, it's a matter of cost. I mean, this is it. Seminary training is ridiculously expensive. 3 years in seminary. My son-in-law just graduated in June. Their debt is enormous, and they were one of the ones that were better off when they got there. I mean, they had assets when they got to seminary from owning out my daughter and son-in-law, from having owned a home and things like that, and they're still $60,000 in debt after 3 years. Even back when I went to seminary, it took me 8 years to pay off my seminary debt. Of course, the problem was I had gone to school again in there somewhere, so I had that debt to pay off too. You know, this going back to school.